Hi, this is Tony Ulwick. A number of years ago, we introduced the growth strategy matrix, and since that time, we've been using it in practice to apply ODI theory. What we want to do today is to show you some of the insights we've garnered over the years as we've applied the matrix. What I'd like to do is begin with an overview of the ODI process. What we do first is we identify the job executor and the job that that executor is trying to get done. Next, we uncover the metrics that those people are using to measure success when getting the job done. Third, we quantify the importance and satisfaction of each of those inputs so we can determine where the market is over and underserved. Next, we use the same inputs to see if there are segments of customers with different unmet needs. And lastly, we use this model to formulate a winning growth strategy. I'll spend a little bit of time on sections 1 through 3, but I want to spend more time on 4 and 5 and show how the segments that we discover really dictate the type of strategy that we need to use in order to be successful in the marketplace. So let's get started. There's 5 types of jobs that we look at in our research. We define the market around the core job that the customer is trying to get done. By studying that job, we can help them get the core job done better. We also look at related jobs. These are jobs that the customer is trying to get done in conjunction with the core functional job. And if we know what they are, we could potentially create products that will get multiple jobs done. We also look at emotional jobs, so we can come up with ways to inspire people emotionally through our marketing campaigns. On the consumption side, we look at opportunities to improve the customer journey, which I'll get into more detail here in just one second. And we have the financial metrics that the buyer uses to decide if they want to buy product A over product B. So as we peel this back one more layer, we execute what we call a job mapping exercise, where we take the core functional job and break it down into its component parts and study each step. We do the same thing with the consumption chain jobs, which may include installing, setting up, learning how to use, transporting, cleaning, storing, maintaining, disposing of the product. And what we're getting at here is the complete needs framework, so we can look at all the inputs that we need that are listed on the outer edge of the wheel in order to make innovation predictable. So this includes the outcomes on the core job, outcomes on consumption jobs, related and emotional job statements, and the financial metrics. So let's give a quick example. If the job is to maintain the health of my teeth, there may be a couple of outcomes on that particular job, such as minimize the time it takes to remove particles between teeth, or minimize the likelihood that enamel wears off over time. There may be related jobs, including keep my teeth white, emotional jobs, including be perceived as affluent, consumption outcomes, such as minimize the likelihood that the harmful germs are harbored, or minimize the likelihood of damaging my gums with the product. And there may be financial metrics that relate to cost and product waste. As we look at this in more detail, we see that there's quite a number of inputs that we use in order to figure out our strategy. There may be anywhere from 50 to 100 outcome statements on the core job, 20 to 30 job statements that are related, 10 to 20 emotional job statements, 20 to 30 consumption outcomes, and 15 to 20 financial outcomes. All that goes into a quantitative survey that then goes out to customers so we can figure out which of those outcomes are important and unsatisfied, to what degree, and if there's segments of people with different unmet needs. So when we're thinking about an unmet need, we're looking at what's important to the customer but not well satisfied by existing solutions. We take this information and we insert it into a survey, and we ask people to tell us the importance of each outcome and the degree to which they're currently satisfied given the solution that they're using. We take this information and we plot it out in what we call the opportunity landscape. So you see that one outcome sitting right there. That's one outcome that may be rated by 500 people or more. And they tell us the importance, and what we see is that 81% is telling us that that's very or extremely important, yet only 30% are telling us it's very or extremely satisfied. With that information, we plug it into our algorithm up on top of the screen here, and we can plot out all those different inputs on this graphic. So we can pretty quickly see where the market's underserved, we can see where they're overserved, and we can see where there are table stakes. These are outcomes that are very important, but also very satisfied. There's one other piece of information that we capture here as well. We ask, are you willing to pay more get the job done perfectly? Now, this is always an interesting question because, what does perfect mean? Well, perfect means something different to everybody, but fortunately, we know what perfect means to each individual because they've told us where they're underserved along each dimension. So from this, we're able to figure out if they're willing to pay more to get the job done better, and generally by how much. This becomes very important as we start putting our strategies together a little bit later, as you'll see. Next comes the segmentation. This is discovering groups of customers that have different unmet outcomes. And we find this to be true in every market. People simply don't agree on what outcomes are important and unsatisfied for some reason. And what we want to do is to discover which outcomes are uniquely underserved in each case and why. So to do this, we don't segment around gender or age or any psychographic or demographic characteristic. Instead, what we do is we segment around the customer's unmet outcomes. For example, there may be a third of the market that thinks outcomes 10, 20, and 30 are really important and unsatisfied, and another third of the market that thinks that outcomes 40, 50, and 60 are really important and unsatisfied. So we use factor analysis to discover the variables that people disagree on, outcomes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And then we take those outcomes and we run a clustering process around them, and we put people into groups or clusters, and we can profile them to see if they're over and underserved and by how much. This is a very insightful part of the process because, as I said earlier, in general, a market may look very different than its pieces. And typically we find that in general a market may look like it's a commodity market. It may look like there's nothing underserved or nothing overserved on average. But this could be masked artificially because half the market could think that outcomes are very important and unsatisfied. The other half could think that they're unimportant and very satisfied. And on average, it looked like they're all in the middle. So this is why we want to segment. And when we do, we'll find out that there are, in most cases, very different sets of customers who require different strategies in order to pursue them successfully. So here we see the same outcome, minimize the time it takes to contour the filling. That's rated very differently by different segments of the population. What we learned here, this was a dental study, a dental implant or filling. And what we learned in the study is that on the left, these were comprised of patients that had healthy gums and required just a small filling. In that case, the current products are overserving the market. On the other extreme, we found that there are patients that have unhealthy gums and require a large filling. And in those cases, the dentists are highly underserved. And the reason is, in that situation, patients tend to bleed more. As a result, visualization is impaired. It's harder to keep the area dry, and it's harder to contour a filling in that situation. So when we look at this, we go from a view of the market that looks like we might be in a commodity market to a place where there's very distinct strategies that we need to pursue. Now, we never know what we're going to find. All of these are real studies. This comes from a medical diagnostic study. This comes from an insurance study. This comes from a study in all-terrain vehicles. And this here comes from the work that we did with Bosch on the circular saw. Next, we introduce the jobs to be done matrix, so you can see how all these pieces start fitting together. The matrix itself ties the opportunity to the appropriate strategy. In other words, you don't really get to pick the strategy so much. It's dictated based on the structure of the segment. So as we'll explain here, at a very high level, you can get the job done better, or you can get it done more cheaply. So this leaves us some possibilities. We can get the job done better and charge more. We can get the job done better and charge less. We can get the job done worse and charge less. And we can get the job done worse and charge more. Now, as you'll see, there's strategies for each of these, but the segment that we're focused on is really going to dictate what strategy we're going to choose. Think of it this way. If we're going to get the job done better and charge more, what type of segment must we apply that strategy to in order for it to be successful? And the answer is we would have to target it at underserved customers who are willing to pay more. If we're going to get the job done better and charge less, well, who would that appeal to? Well, that appeals to everybody, whether you're overserved or underserved. What if you're going to get the job done worse and charge less? Well, this will only appeal to overserved customers and non-consumers. And to get the job done worse and charge more, well, who would that win? Well, this is going to win customers with limited options. You could consider, for example, paying for Wi-Fi on an airplane, where you're paying a lot more for service that has a lot to be desired. So let's give these strategies or these different options names. We're calling the upper left a differentiated strategy. This is where you're going to win underserved customers who are willing to pay more to get the job done better. The dominant strategy will win all types of customers. The disruptive strategy is where we'll win overserved customers and non-consumers. And the discrete strategy is where we'll win customers with limited options. In the middle, we'll see what we call the sustaining strategy. This is not getting the job done any significantly better or more cheaply, so you're kind of stuck in the middle. Let's offer an example here. I like using Uber versus taxis. This is really quite interesting because what Uber has done is they've created product offerings for each segment of the market that exists. Now, this is key because in most companies, they don't offer multiple strategies or multiple products to address each situation. And I think this is what makes them unique. So, for example, a differentiated strategy is addressed through their Uber Select product, medium rides and high-end cars. So this is targeted directly at people that are willing to pay more than they were paying for taxis if they could use high-end cars and get the job done better. Now, interestingly, in this market as well, there were lots of people who felt they were paying too much for a taxi. So they didn't want to pay more to get the job done better, but they did want to get the job done better. And this is where UberX comes into play, where they're getting the job done faster, better, and cheaper than a taxi. On the disruptive side, there is a way you can actually get the job done worse, but charge less. And this is where Uber created the Uber Pool product, where you're sharing your ride and saving. So whereas you're not getting the job done necessarily as well because you're making multiple stops, you're saving money. And then we have the discrete strategy. And here, Uber has incorporated surge pricing into its model. So in the case where there's not enough drivers or too many potential passengers or some unique situation, they can charge more with this pricing model. So they've quite literally thought through each step. And keep in mind, they didn't come up with a single strategy for Uber. They came up with specific strategies for each one of their products. And this is what we encourage. Now, this can only be done, of course, if certain types of segments exist. So this is what we want to talk about next. How do we figure out which strategy we want to pursue and how? So the opportunities themselves dictate the strategy. If we look at this market here, what strategy would we pursue? We have an underserved segment, a lot of unmet needs. This would quite likely mean that we would pursue a differentiated strategy. If we knew that people were willing to pay more to get the job done better and they were highly underserved, we would pursue that strategy and systematically work our way through different versions of a product to systematically get that job done better over time. Now, what if this segment was not willing to pay more to get the job done better? In that case, we would have to pursue a dominant strategy. In other words, we'd be trying to get the job done better, but not adding cost to the product or not increasing pricing. This, of course, becomes more challenging from an ideation and invention standpoint, but if your customers are not willing to pay more to get the job done better, that's the situation that you face. What about this situation here? This comes from an insurance company as well. The strategy we might pursue here would focus on being dominant, getting the job done better along these underserved outcomes, and getting the job done more cheaply with the set of outcomes we find here. So again, because of the way the segment is described, we pick the strategy that best aligns with that so we can win in the marketplace. What about this one here? This is highly overserved, clearly a disruptive strategy. This here, the market is seemingly quite well satisfied, so where do we go from here? This would require a sustaining strategy where we may just make sure we don't mess up on any of these table stakes and try to get the job done slightly better and do more cheaply by focusing on some of these under and overserved outcomes. This one here, quite unique, and when we see a situation like this, the sustaining strategy is in order. And also, this is where you start thinking about focusing on related jobs, so you might be able to get more jobs done with your product. So let's take this to the next level, because it's typically the case that you don't formulate a strategy for just one product. There might be multiple segments that require multiple strategies. And this is where this process really shines. What we've got here are the segments as we've described, and we have our model. So in the case of the dentist trying to fill a cavity, we see here that we've got three very different strategies that we need to pursue. From the model, we can quickly determine that a sustaining strategy would make sense for 57% of the customers. And this is what our client followed. They improved their current products along those underserved dimensions and targeted at those 57% of the market. Next, they looked at their current product and cost reduced it across a number of different dimensions so they could get the job done worse, but more cheaply, and targeted that offering at 19% of the market. Then on the far right, they looked at a brand new platform that could potentially get the job done significantly better when the patients had unhealthy gums and required a large filling. Let's look at another example. This comes from a diagnostic case, testing for cataracts. And up here, of course, this would require a disruptive strategy, but the rest of the market was highly underserved, which would suggest that we need a differentiated strategy. And again, this is a very interesting case because our client was focused on lead users, key opinion leaders, which fell mainly into that upper left segment. They were not representative of the rest of the market, which of course caused a number of problems, as you might imagine. Here's another example. This is an insurance product. They were offering one product, and what they decided to do was to pursue a dominant strategy by getting the job done better along these dimensions over here and getting the job done more cheaply by focusing on these outcomes across the market. This comes from an all-terrain vehicle manufacturer where they had about 50% market share in that purple segment, about 50% market share in the gold segment, and about 5% market share in the red segment. What they did is they pursued a sustaining strategy in the purple segment and in the gold segment. But in this segment here, they pursued a dominant strategy. And one of the key inputs here was that we learned that they were not willing to pay more to get the job done better along these dimensions. So they had to come up with a solution that got the job done better where they were underserved, but with no additional price or cost added. So all these are some of the possibilities. And this last one here, this comes from the Bosch example, where Bosch wanted to enter the North American circular saw market with a differentiated offering. And as we told them, the only way that's going to happen is if there is an underserved segment. It turns out there was. There was a group of people who had to make more lengthy cuts and angle cuts, and they had 14 unmet needs that nobody else had. So that became the target for their differentiated strategy. Now, they could have also pursued a disruptive strategy, but they didn't want to do that, come up with a lower cost version of a product under the Bosch brand because that was inconsistent with their brand image. These are all the examples, and when we look at it from this perspective, I love asking the question, what would the chances be that a company would randomly come up with a solution or a strategy for a portfolio if they didn't know what segments existed and what needs were unmet or overserved in each of those segments? And the answer, of course, is slim to none. And this is where the power of ODI really comes through. By understanding what those different segments are, we can systematically put together a strategy that addresses each in the correct manner. So what we recommend is that we follow each of these steps. First, determine what under and overserved segments exist. Determine what segments are willing to pay more to get the job done better. And then use the matrix to align the strategy with the opportunity as we've described here. Well, I want to thank you for listening today. I appreciate that. Feel free to contact us at the places provided here on the screen. And also, if you want to download the free book, you can go to jobsbedone.com and download it for free from there. Thank Thanks again for listening.